author, columnist, managing editor of LibertyNation.com, podcast host and conservative policy advocate.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Hello and welcome back to Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network from our flagship station in the nation's capital, WWRC in Washington, D.C. I am, as always, your host, Mark Angelides. On today's special edition, we're going to be talking communication, how that's been working out for both presidential candidates. We'll also be talking the surrogate media, the rise of X, and the hybrid warfare that just brought a rude awakening to the Hezbollah terrorists in Lebanon. Remember, this show is proudly sponsored by LibertyNation.com, where you can access podcasts, breaking news, analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. Communication is king in the land of elections, and this year is no different. We're very fortunate to have with us somebody who understands the key elements of communication, whether that's body language, what messaging means, and digging beneath the surface. Very fortunate to have with us Liberty Nation's executive editor, Lisa K. Donner. Thanks for being here, Lisa.
Good to be here, Mark. A lot to talk about this week.
There really is. And I think that there's an overarching theme that I want to address, and that's communication. And I guess the first question I got to ask here is, in the wake of the second assassination attempt against Donald Trump, how much will Donald Trump's communication strategies be impacted by that in terms of, will he continue doing the rallies, things like this? What do you think?
Well, I don't think anything's going to stop him. He seems to be a courageous sort, and he's rather unflappable when it comes to this stuff. And which is kind of shocking, you know, I think the first one set him back a little bit, but the second one sort of took in stride. And he was only one golf hole away from being very close to this guy and his AK-47, and the guy lie in wait for him for 12 hours. But he seems to be taking it in stride. I think, you know, everybody's been counseling him, do it inside, don't do it outside where people can go through magnetometers or whatever they're called now. I'm not really sure the name of the metal detectors, but, you know, I think he's behind plexiglass now. But, you know, you can't live inside a bubble. And he was playing golf on Sunday, and he's got to continue to have some respite. So I see him as trying to take some precautions, but not necessarily change his communication level very much, because he's an extrovert. He's one of those people that feeds off of the energy of other people. He needs that energy.
Yeah, I agree. It is quite poignant what you say there, because after the first assassination attempt, they put up these big bulletproof barriers for his rally. And then all of a sudden, a lady in the crowd, she passes out or something, and so he comes out from behind, walks down the steps. Which, by the way, I should point out, Donald Trump can walk down steps. I don't.
Yes, he can.
And
the Secret Service went nuts. They went crazy. Yeah. I mean, they were just all, you know, running past him, and he's like, "Are you all right?" And you know, it's kind of crazy. I don't see it changing his message that much or his communication that much, and we're, you know, coming down to the wire here.
Yeah, we're less than, at the time of recording, we're less than 60 days. We're even closer than that out from the election. And it really is the time for the candidates to start hitting as many high points as they can in terms of getting the message across. And I wonder whether, because and I'll go off on a bit of a tangent here, not for too long, I promise. It seems to me that, and you said he thrives on the crowd, and to me that always seems to be almost, if one could be said to have a superpower, his superpower is being energized and energizing crowds. And I wonder if the new precautions that the Secret Service might insist upon to have operational security might be a big chunk of kryptonite.
No, I don't. He's the one that makes the decisions, and I don't think he's going to separate himself from the people. But the interesting thing is, the only person who has died at any of these rallies is a rally goer, and I'm interested in the fact that he's still packing them in. I mean, people don't seem to be worried about personal harm, and you know, in going to one of his rallies.
In ancient Rome, just a short story, in ancient Rome, when people would go to to the gladiatorial events and the chariot race in the Circus Maximus, which both fantastic places even today. But when they would go there, they would pay extra money to sit very, very close because there was a chance that they could get sprayed with the dirt from the chariot wheels, the sweat from the horses, or the blood from the gladiators. And it added an element for them. And I don't think that's something that's true for uh, political fans of things. But there is an element they want to be close to the action. And I think that term, close to the action, whatever that action is, applies quite significantly for politics because people think that they're taking part in history.
Well, the most expensive tickets are always in the front.
Very true. Those in the really expensive seats just jingle their jewelry,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly.
So yeah,
Let me just say one thing. You're talking about communications, and it was interesting. The headlines earlier this week were Kamala Harris has now done, sit down interview by herself. And I thought, oh, okay, let's see what's going on. Well, she sat down with the National Association of Black Journalists. And, the Black journalist group was three. And this is an old organization. As long as I've been in television and radio and communications, they've been around. So this isn't a new organization. I thought this is really an opportunity to put themselves on the map for people who haven't heard about them. And yet their question to her was, why do you think talking about joy is so important? And their question to Donald Trump a couple of weeks ago was,
why are you racist?
Yeah, why are you racist? And I thought, that's a missed opportunity by the NABJ. They could have really done something with their reputation and fired a few tough questions at her. She should have been able to handle them, but she was kind of back to her old self and not that quick debate, repartee.
I'm going to defend Vice President Kamala Harris here and say that she answered just about the questions that she was asked. And she wasn't asked anything difficult because they're on her side and they want her to win. I mean, when one of their questions, and I'm not going to quote this accurately, I don't have it written down in front of me, but it was, with Donald Trump being irredeemably racist, do you think there's some federal action that should be taken against him? I mean, that is not the question that somebody who's seeking to get to know a candidate, to get those candidates' policies so people can talk about them. That's a surrogate. And they've lost, really, as far as I can see, they've lost any semblance of being a serious organization with that. And I think that's a detriment, not just to themselves, but to the country who could be benefiting from some serious journalism at the moment.
Yeah, and she did acquit herself well in the debate. There's no doubt about it. But at the same time, a lot has come out about the ties between ABC and the Kamala Harris campaign or Kamala Harris personally. And I think, that grates on Americans who tend to like fair scales.
Yeah, it can't help if she's seen as aided and abetted by the media because, and again, I'm defending Kamala Harris here, and that's not my role, but it shows her as being weak because
exactly.
If she needs their help to perform at any reasonable level, well, then she's not competent, and that's the impression that I guess clear thinkers might take away from that.
Yeah, or she can't handle the heat. And nobody wants a president that can't handle the heat, let's face it. So I think they really should fire some tougher questions at her. The interesting thing is a lot is being fooled around with the economy right now. And the economy are really the questions that need to be answered. And those are the questions that need to be fired at her. And we've got to get off of this business of I'm middle class. As you said the other day, how many middle class homes have 2 PhDs as parents?
Absolutely. Well,
it didn't happen in my middle class neighborhood. I don't know too many PhDs. How about you?
Well, I don't know. I think that's going to be much more the case in the future because, a PhD in gender studies is going to earn you, I don't know, a cup of Starbucks and $8 an hour. But back in those days, that was that's a pretty well-off family. And coming into the issue is, you can't answer every single question with, I was raised in a middle class family, no matter what the topic is. You know, what are you going to do about gun violence? I was raised in a middle class family. What are you going to do about the economy? When my middle class family, it's just, it's old hat and it's not interesting. And
Mark, go ahead, go ahead, good. I
we're
was
gonna,
just going to say what this communicates to people is that I'm like you. I'm like you, and you can identify with me. But is that really what people want in a president? Do they really want somebody that they can? I mean, they weren't identifying with Ronald Reagan. They weren't identified with George H.W. Bush. Not even W, his son, was somebody you could. I think when people are picking leaders, maybe they don't necessarily want somebody that is exactly like them, but they want somebody that exudes leadership qualities. But maybe I'm wrong.
I don't think you are, Lisa. We'll be back with Lisa K. Donner after this short break. Don't go anywhere.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And we're back on Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I'm still your host, Mark Angelides, and we are continued to be joined by Liberty Nation's executive editor, Lisa K. Donner. Now, Lisa, we've been talking communication.
No namaste. No namaste.
No namaste.
I saw two of those. If
That
you're
is,
watching.
for those of you who are watching this on video catch-up, that wasn't a namaste. That was me doing a Mr. Burns from The Simpsons thing. Oh, that's the story, and I'm sticking with it.
Yeah, exactly.
The tented fingers of evil. So we've been talking communications, and I want to carry this topic on. Let's talk about Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. More specifically, let's go and talk about their surrogates, because surrogates are the ones that are, let's say, prosecuting these campaigns at the moment. And it seems to me that on Donald Trump's side, you've got some very interesting surrogates, no doubt. You've got Tulsi Gabbard, you've got Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and you've got Elon Musk. They're three very
And
powerful
J.D.
voices.
Vance, of course.
And J.D. Vance, of course. He doesn't count, though. He's on the ticket. He doesn't count. But he is a very forceful personality and very competent at getting his point across. And then on the flip side, you've got Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, obviously. But her surrogates, and without meaning to denigrate anybody here, it's the legacy media types who we know would clap for a biscuit for any Democrat that was on the ticket, as they did with Joe Biden when his clear cognitive decline was suddenly revealed to them after the debate, after everybody else knew about it for a year. You've got a handful of celebrities who, let's be fair, either candidate's policies, if enacted, will not affect them in any way, shape, or form. The tax things won't affect them. Any restrictions on things will not affect them. And who else do you have? You have a little social media army that goes out there spreading weird little 3-second clips to try and make Donald Trump look bad. Then they get ratioed when everybody shows the other 3 seconds where it means something completely different. And I think in terms of the surrogate wars, and that's what we're going to call it, the surrogate wars. It follows the great Roman legion wars of the early millennia. I think in the surrogate wars, Donald Trump's winning. But what's your take on that?
I think surrogates are only of so much use.
Yes.
It's from the top down. Trump also has, a second level of surrogates like Kellyanne Conway, who I think is a superb communicator. She always has something really crafty and clever to say, but it always seems to be on target. She's quite a force, I think, as a second surrogate. But I think it comes from the top down. And I guess I wanted to ask you, one of them's got a campaign of, we better be careful here. There's definitely trouble ahead. And the other one's got a campaign of hope and joy and changing and looking for the future. Which one do you think is more effective communication-wise?
I think the former is more effective. And the reason for that is...
Former meaning, do you mean...
Oh, the former meaning that there's danger on the way, and I know how to stop it coming, as opposed to the latter, which would be the hope and joy, because everybody likes a positive message. Of course they do. But that's only good when times are good. And if times are bad, and economically, militarily around the world, foreign policy, the border crisis, fentanyl, education, national debt. When things are not good, they need somebody to, voters want somebody, I think, to identify there's a problem, to say how the problem came about, how they're going to fix it, and this will be the end result.
You know,
It doesn't give you that.
I used to think the same thing, but I've done a lot of research, and strangely enough, it's the positive campaigns that are usually the winning campaigns. And obviously, the Democrats know that. I mean, research after research. I've dug into papers and PhD papers and lots of research online, and it tends to be the positive campaigns that win over the negative campaigns. So that's something to watch. I think perhaps Donald Trump can be careful of his rhetoric a little bit and try to not paint a rosy picture where there isn't one, but not paint a, we're headed for World War III either.
That's absolutely fascinating, Lisa. I'd really love to actually, maybe we should think about doing this on the page of libertynation.com, put together an analysis of the presidential races and the key messages. And
No, it is true. I mean, think
Yeah.
about it. Morning in America.
Sure, Morning in
Ronald
America,
Reagan.
great one. However, I think there is one element that I'd be very curious to dig into on that, and that's whether, because as far as I can tell, this race with Kamala Harris, this is a continuation of the Biden presidency. So she's the de facto incumbent because she is at the White House.
Well, yeah.
And so a message of positive hope on a record of, let's be fair, fairly negative factors. I wonder if that plays as well. So these second term messages, second term campaigns, are they the positive ones? Or, as Joe Biden was hinting at when he was shortly running for thing, he wanted to finish the job, meaning that things weren't where they needed to be.
Well, let's look at this. Okay, so running for a second term and losing in the relative recently, in the last 50
Sure.
years or so, we've got Jimmy Carter and George H.W. Bush, right?
And Donald
Rest,
Trump.
yeah, and the rest don't really count because they were reelected. So, and being reelected as an incumbent is a definite advantage for sure.
Mm.
So, are you saying in their second terms, were they negative or positive, or
Yes.
what's your
Yeah,
point here?
that's what I'd like to find out, is if their second terms, if their messaging was more or less positive than their campaigns in the first term. So Obama in 2008 was hope and change, but he wasn't so much that in 2012.
But he didn't need to be. I think in both
Sure.
instances, in thinking about George H.W. Bush and Jimmy Carter, what crushed them both was the economy, especially for Carter. He just was, he was annihilated by the economy. And George H.W. Bush, with his tax, issues, no
Read
new
my
taxes,
lips.
read
No
my
new
lips.
taxes. By the way, here's the new taxes.
But he, first time around, he had the 1,000 points of light, so he had the positive message too. I'm just saying that I think candidates need to be aware that a positive message does help.
We'll be continuing this conversation after this short break with Lisa K. Donna. Don't go anywhere.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And you're back with Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I remain your host, Mark Angelides, and we're continuing our fascinating conversation on elections and campaign communications with Liberty Nation's executive editor, Lisa K. Donna. Thanks for staying with us, Lisa. Now, let's talk really into the weeds about how communication is. So there's a purpose to communication, and that is usually to get a message across. What message is each candidate trying to send?
Well, if you want to look at messages, what you want to do is you want to look at TV commercials. And it's interesting over the past 50 years how messaging in campaigns has changed. Let's face it, the debates didn't really take off until 1960. And then, the business of television commercials was very important. By the way, you want to talk about another positive campaign, JFK. High hopes, I've got high hopes. Okay.
I can finish that one for you. It's
Happy days are here
song.
again.
Yeah.
High hopes. That was a very positive campaign too. But anyway, so I guess if you look down through the ages, communications really have changed a lot. Now television commercials aren't nearly as important as they were. Radio commercials aren't nearly as important. Now everything's on the internet. Now the power of X, that's what I wanted to ask you. What do you think is the power of X this time around versus last time around? Because X has really changed a lot. And has that changed the communication environment, in your opinion?
Absolutely. So during the last election, X was the place where conservative ideas go to die,
Right.
because they were throttled, and it's the same across many platforms, many social media platforms. Conservative ideas, people who were bolstering for one particular candidate that wasn't Joe Biden, and very, very true in 2016 against Hillary Clinton. The conservative ideas, they went there and they died a death. But now that Elon Musk is at the helm of that particular unruly ship, what we're seeing is
That's a good way of putting it too, unruly ship.
I'll use that in a title somewhere, I'm sure. What we're seeing is it's a battleground, but it's rather an enjoyable battleground for those of you who don't spend much time on X. There really is quite the competition between people pushing for their ideas, pushing for their sides, and the
Oh, you
cut and
mean it's
thrust
really
of
a
it.
free speech forum?
I know it's crazy, right? Who'd have
Shocking.
thought? Who'd have thunk it, as Winnie the Pooh once said. Yeah, it's become a free speech battleground in all the best possible ways. Uh, but I think to finish up that point, Donald Trump's doing something very, very interesting here. He's, as far as I can tell, he's reimagining what it means to be a candidate in the 21st century. He was the candidate in 2016 who took social media by the throat and made it pay attention. And
Yeah.
that's something that he's continued to do
Well,
through.
I will say, in fairness, Romney tried to, but technologically they just couldn't get there. Their whole Orca thing just crashed and burned. He tried, but
Pierre Despereaux was his foray, wasn't it? Was
yeah,
that his fake Twitter handle, Pierre
something like that.
Despereaux?
Yeah. But they understood the power of it. They just couldn't harness it properly, is what I'm
Yes.
saying.
Yeah, very true. It takes a different kind of mind to understand a different kind of technological battlefield, I think.
Right.
So how important do you think social media advertising versus television advertising is this year?
I think it's enormously important. And we're even seeing as a website, week to week how things change, you know,
Mm.
spending, on X versus spending on, say, Facebook versus spending on, it's a rapidly changing, not just social media, but the technology behind the social media is changing. And I think it's fueling a lot of interesting things, but I think the most powerful thing is X. And they really are, I think, the front runners in communication in this campaign, in my humble opinion. And I'm not on X all the time. So unlike you and a lot of your peers, you guys are on X more than us older people. But I really think that that is the changing dynamic in communication. You have to pay attention to it.
Mm.
And it's very mercurial and it goes by really fast.
Very true. Although in my defense, I'm only on it for either work purposes or dog videos. In my defense, there now there used to be YouTube for
I
the
thought it was
cat
SNL
video.
old skits, right?
Well, they're on there too, aren't they? The old SNL skits. If anybody wants to see a great takeoff of an SNL skit, watch last week's episode on Catch Up, or head to the the Radio America archives, and we have Tim Donner doing a marvelous George H.W. Bush take on there from an SNL skit, and that was quite fascinating.
Yes, those 1,000 points of light.
1,000 points of light. So yes, it's a changing battlefield. Now, depending on the result, do you think that this social media arena, do you think it will change? Like, for example, it's quite clear now that Donald Trump has the upper hand on social media. He knows how to use it better.
But she has the legacy media, and you can't discount the old gray lady.
That's my question. Since the legacy media is in lockstep with the Democrats, and they really, I can't remember the last time the legacy media said a particularly positive thing about a Republican candidate. Do you think that people have just lost their faith in that in that form of media, and that's why there's a thing? Or is it two competing bodies? Or is everybody moving away from the legacy media
Well,
because they know what their
you
answer
have to remember the legacy media is in the battle for its own existence. And as they try to morph and change, if you notice, 3 years ago, you didn't see on the digital websites of the major papers, you didn't see a lot of video. Now you're confronted with, you go onto their digital sites and there's video there. Well, why is that? Because people like to watch video apparently on the internet. I'm not a big fan of it myself, but oodles and oodles of people like that. So they're in a battle for their own survival. So that taints everything, I think, from there on down. You know what I'm saying?
I do. Although it begs a further question, doesn't it? Before they were surviving when they were less openly partisan, then they went full partisan, and now they're dying a long, slow death in darkness.
Well, let's face it. I mean, the alternative media, the alternative media of which we are a part, sprang up because there were no dissenting voices from the legacy media. And that's why the only reason people went to alternative media is because they weren't hearing or they weren't satisfied with the legacy media or the big box media or whatever, mainstream media, whatever you want to call it. That's what built the alternative media. They were just tired of the same old tune being played. It's like listening to the same song over and over 1,000 times at a certain point. You don't want to hear Hotel California anymore.
I don't think I've ever reached that particular point, Lisa.
Oh, I have.
No, I think you're probably right there, Lisa. It's almost as though the burgeoning social media, the alternative media, it's a monster of their own creation, and it might just
Thank you.
It might just be the thing that puts it in its.
If they offered alternative voices, I think there would be no alternative media. But they didn't. Everybody was marching in lockstep.
It's what's the word?
And the last time I remember Americans wanting everybody to march in lockstep was during the Revolutionary War when they raised the flag, join or die. That was about it.
And let's hope we're not approaching that one again.
No.
Lisa K. Donna, thank you ever so much for taking the time to be with us and give us your wisdom, your words, and your wit. Very much appreciated.
Oh, it was great being here with you, Mark. I enjoyed it very much.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Hezbollah gets a rude awakening courtesy of some 1980s style tech. What was it about? What happened? What does this mean for the future of warfare in the region? Well, we're very fortunate to have with us Liberty Nation's national security correspondent, who's a retired U.S. Air Force pilot and the former Principal Deputy Undersecretary of Defense Controller, Mr. Dave Patterson. How are you, sir?
Hi, Mark. Glad to be with you.
It's really great to have you on. Thank you for being with us directly after the happenings in Lebanon. And thank you for a superb analysis of the situation on the pages of libertynation.com that you put together. But let's talk about this in some detail, if we may. A number of pagers, and I've never owned a pager. That was I've never owned one, and likely never will now. Let's be fair. Went off with explosive ordnance. That were carried around by a number of Hezbollah organizers, active members, and it resulted in some deaths, many injuries. And it seems to me this is in terms of warfare, this is a new tangent that we're seeing, isn't it?
Yes, it is. But it's something that the Israelis have participated in before, and they're quite adroit at it. And what I think you take away from this is the magnitude of what they did in order to accomplish this disruption in communications for Hezbollah and effectively destroying the confidence of the average foot soldier in the equipment that he's been given. And I think that is quite remarkable. And when you consider the fact that there were at least 2,800 of these distributed, because that's the number of injuries, that's quite remarkable. I mean, there's a lot of packaging and repackaging and doing it so that nobody notices that the pagers have been replaced or that they've been modified. That's quite extraordinary.
So there's a few levels to dig into here, Dave. And I guess the first one is how. Now we're presuming it's Israel. They do have form in this area by, I believe it was a cell phone that they managed
Yes.
to rig. But it was because of that cell phone, that cell phone attack, where some terrorist leader was doing a regularly scheduled call with his father, and so they knew when he was going to have the phone next to his head, and triggered the explosive device. It's because of actions like that and Israel's dominance in cyber infiltration that they opted to go for pagers, right? Because that's a very low tech way of being able to do messages, because you can use any regular payphone then once you know that you've got to respond. And so they get these pagers, and then somehow, because these are not Israeli pages, it's not as though Hezbollah are saying, hey, you know what, let's nip over to a market across the border in Israel and buy 3,000 pagers. But they've managed to infiltrate the entire intelligence system that went and purchasing system that went through getting these pagers, put explosive devices in them, had them go out, and then the first thing I thought of was it was when the European families decided to band together and get rid of the Illuminati, and that was on it was on a Friday the 13th, October the 13th, I believe. And what they did was they sent out sealed orders all around the world to execute the people at the same time, so that the groups couldn't regroup. And that's why now today we have Friday the 13th as a bad luck day. It was almost an instant decapitation of leadership. Sorry, I'm going on too much of this, but there's so many layers to it, Dave. How deep down the rabbit hole do we go with it?
Well, I think that you don't have to go very far, actually. I mean, yeah, the fact is that there was an extraordinary amount of logistics and planning and so forth that went into it. But it could have been, you look at Occam's razor, what's the simplest explanation for anything, and perhaps it's a bit of a modification of that. But it could be as simple as the large pallet of pagers sitting on a platform ready to be delivered, and the Israelis come in and switch the platform and the pagers, and off go the pagers with the modification. But again, knowing that they were going to go to pagers, knowing that they were not enamored with cell phones any longer, because the cell phones can be tracked, right? GPS, that's really the issue. And the Ayatollah told them that cell phones could be tracked, and so cautioned against using them. And as a consequence, they went to the pagers. So, which, the Ayatollah's credibility may have gone down a bit, but nonetheless, there's all manner of variations on this theme of what they could have done in order to. But my sense is that whoever did this did it in a way that provided the most cover, the least risk, and the most guaranteed opportunity for success. And obviously it was successful. I think probably beyond anybody's expectation when you think about it.
Yes. Now, Hezbollah in Lebanon has been taking part in some fairly indiscriminate bombing into Israel. And one of the themes that I see tracking social media stuff in the wake of this is that there's so many voices on social media who are supposed to be respectable people saying, how could Israel target people indiscriminately? And it got me thinking, well, isn't that what Hezbollah's been doing by launching bombs into Israel? I mean, they're not really caring who they're hitting as long as they're hitting someone or something. And it really wasn't an indiscriminate retaliatory attack if it was indeed Israel, was it? Because these pages they weren't being sold in shops. They were supplied by Iran for Hezbollah foot soldiers. Is that about right?
And I think that's exactly right. And the fact that it was so specific and not indiscriminate that it has made the point that whoever did this was attempting to make. It was very targeted. It identified Hezbollah exclusively and in Lebanon, and it was obviously done because those were the people to whom the pagers were going to be given.
Right. So how does, not that anybody wants them to, but how I can't see a good, clear strategy on how Hezbollah in Lebanon, I believe also in Syria, how they can really regroup, knowing that they can't really risk using cell phone communication, as you rightly point out, GPS tracking. They can be targeted very, very easily and succinctly there. They can't use pagers anymore. Anything cyber related, email, stuff like this, can be cracked and utilized against them. So how do they even regroup? How do they reorganize?
Well, I think that what you've hit upon is one of the key elements of hybrid or unconventional warfare, information warfare, and that is the targeting of institutions. The idea behind hybrid warfare is to destroy the confidence of your enemy in their institutions. You start to take on your universities, your police stations, everything that constitutes something that is reliable and you can count on. That's the target. So as you can see with the pagers and the fact that their intelligence was breached so badly. Now, what's the foot soldier thinking? Well, what in my kit was going to explode now? And to your point, I can't use any of the communications that I normally relied upon as an institution, if you will, for how to get a hold of other people. I can't rely on that anymore. And so this is absolutely classic hybrid warfare, and I think that people should go to school on this.
Yes, I mean, it seems to me that the only safe option these Hezbollah terrorists have is snail mail. And that's if they dare risk licking the stamp, Dave. So let's get down to the final question here, Dave. What was the U.S. reaction to the attack?
Well, I think we can take as the representative of the U.S. position and Secretary Blinken's response when he had a press conference in Cairo, Egypt. And his response was, we can't agree with anything that escalates the tensions in the region, which is pretty much what you would expect. I mean, this is a feckless response. Rather than saying, look, the Israelis do what they have to do in order to secure the defense of their nation and to respond to the persistent attacks from every quarter. And we should celebrate that. But of course, we wouldn't, because we don't celebrate success, we celebrate failure.
Dave Patterson, thank you ever so much for joining us. And that's about all we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I've been your host, Mark Angelides. I'd like to thank our guests today, Lisa K. Donner, Executive Editor over at LibertyNation.com, and Dave Patterson. Please take note, Liberty Nation does not endorse candidates, campaigns, or legislation, and this production is no endorsement. Finally, give my thanks to you, the audience at home, for taking the time each week to tune in and join us for the show. We do appreciate you.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.